Well, now for a review of what's making the headlines in the papers this morning, let's bring in a RISE analyst, Dr. Constance Ikwoko. Good morning, Dr. Constance.
Good morning, Yolanda.
Good
Good
morning,
to see you.
Dr.
Good to see you. Good to see you. You're so white. Well, cream. That's not white. It's cream. You look
That's
like
how
an
it's reflecting.
angel. Floating.
Wow.
Dr. Constance. This is a comeback. You know that,
Yes.
Benga. This is a
Yes.
comeback.
I get always sentimental, being in the midst of beautiful angels.
Oh, okay. That's another level.
We are ready today.
All right. We're glad you're delighted to be in our midst.
Yeah.
We're great to, I mean, it's good to have you too, isn't it? Yeah, Gwenga.
Yeah.
All right.
As an addition.
Yeah. All right, good to see everyone. Now, if you're
Likewise.
just joining us this morning, we'll be looking at the stories that are shaping the agenda for you today in the paper review. We'll be kicking off with this day newspaper. The front pages of Nigeria's newspapers today are led by political and electoral developments, with the Senate affirming an amended approach to electronic transmission of election results ahead of the 2027 polls, paired with conditional manual backups where necessary. There's also a major political move as FCT Minister Wike expresses optimism with President Tinubu's attempt to resolve the prolonged Rivers political crisis. Across business and governance pages, coverage highlights fiscal debates, while security concerns and major violence continue to shape public debate. Now, this day has gone with that running story on transmission as Senate fails again to approve real-time transmission of election results. At NEC conference, Tinubu wants action, promises strong economy, and National Revenue Service targets 40.71 trillion revenue naira for 2026. It collected 28.3 trillion naira in 2025. Vanguard writes about Nigeria dropping 2 places in the Transparency International Corruption Index, now ranking 142nd out of 182 countries. Al-Rufai declares, Tinubu and I are parallel lines and will never meet. Former presidential candidate Gbenga Olowekpo Hashim reminds us that Nigeria's GDP per capita income once surpassed China and Malaysia when we ignored the IMF. The message being that Nigeria can do without International Monetary Fund economic prescriptions. Tax revenue jumps 30% to 28.3 trillion in 2025. Daily Independent leads with Tinubu advising governors to get to work on jobs, healthcare, and infrastructure. NIMET predicts early onset of rains in southern north central states. You know, it rained yesterday, so and even on the weekend it started raining already. Chief of Defense Staff says armed forces alone can't solve Nigeria's insecurity challenges. Leadership reports on Kwara State, with Chief of Defense Staff revealing that special forces will be deployed there. APC crisis looms in Ondo, parallel exercise imminent. And Atiku marking the visit IBB in Mina. New Telegraph reads about U.S. Congress, which has asked Trump to submit report on strategy to stop targeted killings in Nigeria. Change of guard at Labour Party Secretariat as Nanadi Usman takes over. Several Nigerians fear death as migrant boat capsizes off Libyan coast. The Guardian writes about Russia denying Nigerian mercenaries are killed in that country. The Punch reads about states spending 455 billion naira to service foreign loans, and U.S. deploys 200 troops to Nigeria. Moving on to the international headlines, let's pull up the Times. Across the press there, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer's leadership is under the spotlight. Surviving calls to resign but portrayed as politically bruised, with Labour division still in focus. Crime also featured prominently, with several tabloids leading on a serious school stabbing incident. And lighter stories on culture and celebrity also make the front pages. The Times says Mandelson investigation will go back to the Blair era. The Guardian focuses on Starmer's defiance and ongoing internal labor tensions following Peter Mandelson-related scandal fallout. Financial Times highlights growing factionalism and emerging potential challenges within labor ranks. Daily Star uses front page to mock political infighting with light satirical lines. It says, Larry the number 10 cat wants out too. Daily Mail, Daily Mirror and Daily Telegraph lead with a serious school stabbing in northwestern London, reporting 2 boys seriously injured and counter-terror police involvement. Daily Express targets Labour taxes, which it calls a shameful assault on high streets. The Guardian, MEPs approve offshore centers for migrants. Finally, Financial Times, centers stammer again with allies admitting he is weak. Now, let's see what the stories mean for everyday people returning to this day newspaper. The Senate adopts electronic transmission of results, allowing manual collation as fallback. By virtue of Section 60, subsection 3 of the proposed Electoral Amendment Bill 2026, results will be electronically transmitted from one polling unit to INEC IRF portal. But it was silent on whether this will be in real time. Under the approved clause, electronic transmission is allowed where the technology does not fail and is possible to use. However, in situations where electronic transmission fails or becomes impossible, the signed form EC8A will serve as a primary and authoritative document for collation. This means INEC is empowered to use its discretion at any time. Already there are reactions as expected. Article says opposition must oppose amended bill. PDP says Senate is being clever by half. Bugaji alleges Senate plans to rig. ADC says reversal is victory for Nigerians, at least for electronic transmission. Wenga, what do you make of this? And was it a genuine rethink or simply fear of public backlash?
Okay, I think more than ever, you will permit me to take my point of departure from the words of Shakespeare. There is a trend in the affairs of men which, when taken, leads to fortune. But when omitted, the journey ends in abyss of disappointment and failure. And this is what we are saying. We have cried here that democracy in Africa is in crisis. And what has happened yesterday, I describe it as a parliamentary coup, as best, to subvert the future of Nigerians. Because when you look at it, the background to this was the concern that trailed the 2023 elections, where people felt that INEC, after adopting the real transmission technology, used it for the Osun elections, used it for the National Assembly elections, and now at the presidential election, for some controversial reasons, it jettisoned it and put it aside. And when the petitioners got to the Supreme Court, they said that, okay, what was observed that INEC was given too much discretionary powers, and they said that, okay, the INEC, it would amount to judicial rascality to forced to fill up the gap, that they need to go back to the National Assembly and ensure that the real-time electronic transmission of results is mandatory. So now, what are the issues? The issues are the risk threshold, the collateral risk that people are blowing out of proportion on this issue of real-time transmission. But we have also forgotten that this stance is hypothetical, because Section 47, subsection 3 spoke about the beavers and the event of the network failure on the beavers. It says that the election should be cancelled and rescheduled. So why are we frustrating a clear path forward to our electoral future? I think that this is at best a parliamentary rascality and gangsterism against the wish of the people.
Right. I mean, much has been said about this. If we have a serious leadership and serious government, whatever is the problem we have today in terms of electronic transmission of results and real-time transmission, you can begin to work ahead of it to 2031.
Absolutely.
So that when you get to 2031,
Absolutely.
you're not giving another excuse.
Absolutely.
Enough of the excuses. Let's stay with this day to look at another story. The federal government has given the National Revenue Service higher revenue target for 2026. The service must bring in 40.71 trillion naira. This is 44% higher than the 25.2 trillion naira target for last year. The service actually collected higher than that target that was given last year. It was able to do 28.3 trillion naira. Yolanda, ostensibly, this is why it's being asked to do even more.
I don't know if you had more of those that data, Dr. Constance.
Yeah. Let me share it.
Sure.
Yeah. So, let's see. The figures that we're dealing with is that 15.09 trillion naira is going to be used for debt service this year. And then 25.27 trillion is the budget deficit that we're dealing with. And now the revenue target has been raised to 40.7 trillion naira. Although a few days ago, or was it yesterday, it was reported that the revenue target was 33.19 trillion naira. So what we're dealing here is that a lot of debt servicing that is going to be swallowing a large share of the revenue and borrowing increasingly expensive. So the government is pushing the revenue service to extract more from taxes, duties, and compliance. It's less a sign of economic expansion and more an admission that the old revenue base can no longer sustain government spending. So the danger is that higher tax targets come without extensive structural reform. If leakages aren't plugged, and revenue agencies may resort to aggressive enforcement on already burdened formal businesses, because you're still dealing with the same formal businesses, while the informal economy remains largely untapped. Because when we listen to what Zach Adedeji said, he's the chairman of the National Revenue Service, what he said, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, he said that his business or his job is actually to encourage businesses to thrive, or to put in place avenues for businesses to thrive, because when businesses do well, then he can collect more taxes. But he also said that the informal sector doesn't have a framework within these new tax laws to be taxed. So you're taxing the same people. And so this could hurt growth and fuel public resentment in the long run. And at the same time, you still fall short of the target that you have. It's turning an ambition into a credibility problem. I don't know how this is going to be managed, but we'll have a whole year to see how they do on that front.
Absolutely. I just wanted to chip in, Benga, before you speak. It seemed like you wanted to say something, so I wanted to jump the gun first there. You know, this tax laws that we have been talking about, this is a conversation that we've been having for a while. And if you remember, in one of our previous conversations specifically about this, we spoke about how the tax laws are still lacking a lot of clarity for the everyday person, and how we don't have enough information on how things will be done. But it seems like despite that, the ball keeps rolling, things keep moving forward. Does this not cause some sort of confusion in the long run?
No, there's not. I mean, there is no confusion anymore. We had that Dr. Zach Adedeji had an extensive interview with this Day Board of Editors. They are continuing to roll out information about what's happening. When you speak to businesses already, they are trying to,
oh yes, I've noticed that they're making the necessary changes. Yes.
This law came into effect last year. Was it July when it was signed? But it was given at least a whole six months for people to get used to it. And so it's already rolling. That's the point now. But let's quickly go to Daily Independent. Benga, let me bring you in there. Nandadi Usman-led caretaker committee now has control of the Labour Party Secretariat. Is this truly the end of a bruising internal war, or is the party still fragile?
You know, when the judgment by Lifu, the court hearing led by Justice Lifu was announced, that announced his interim leadership, we welcome the court judgment here, and we immediately advised that he should, as a matter of urgency, pursue that policy of reconciliation with the Aburi faction. Otherwise, there will be a lingering cloud of uncertainty to the party's ambition. Now, the big big person in the party that they would have used to run this election was Peter Obi. That's a major vacuum being created in the party now. So now, with Aburi still claiming that it's still insisting that it would challenge that judgment, it shows that it's only compounding the woes of the party, because we know that the party has already lost a lot of ground. So there should be political solution. The judiciary cannot find that kind of sustainable solution. Remember that the Supreme Court judgment that was held in April 2025 had to now wait, snowball till January 2022. That's an already lost ground for a party that came in as an alternative force to wrest power from the Tinubu-led government. But now it looks like the race is a bit tilted, if you ask me. And there's a lot of political uncertainty and cloud ahead of the party. I wonder how he's going to use his political savvy to navigate this very turbulent race ahead of the 2027 election.
And honestly, I agree with you, Benga. I couldn't have said it better, because it seems like the Labour Party at this point has lost its spark, alongside with the, moving on of Peter Obi being associated to it. And it appears as though Labour Party was more of the man than it was of, the collective and its impact.
Oh, of course it was.
Yeah, so now it's becoming so evident. And now with him not being in the party, not being associated to it anymore, the party seems to be left open and vulnerable to so much attack, even though they insist that they have a united front and that there's no internal crisis. But is that really the reality?
Anyway,
well,
okay.
the thing is, Nanadi Usman has been in politics for a while. And this will be an opportunity. I think it is an opportunity for the party to reset and see what they're able to do before 2027. The job is going to be very difficult, but it's a test to her leadership. If the caretaker committee can quickly organize credible conventions, congresses, rebuild grassroots structures, and present a united national front, Labour Party may still be able to position itself as a serious third force challenger, although it has to deal with the ADC as well, and maybe the PDP is able to get itself together. But if the infighting drags, they have a political risk in 2027. It depends on whether the other faction decides, you know what, we want to shit our sword, stop fighting, and join, the faction that has now clearly won that battle. So let's see whether that missed momentum they had in 2023 is something that was just a moment, and they can build on that foundation now. We have a Vanguard newspaper. Nigeria drops 2 places in the Transparency International Corruption Index, now ranks 142nd out of 182 countries. By now, people are probably tired of talking about corruption,
Yes.
Yolanda. But this matters for systems, for processes, for resource delivery. Does it seem this government is prioritizing this particular issue?
Well, I will say this. First of all, let me just pull a few of the statements from the report. So Nigeria is considered to be one of 36 most corrupt nations globally. Now, this data is from reports involving corruption with police, legislature, presidency, courts, and local governments are included in this as well. Now, it's quite unfortunate that even though that there are some anti-graft organizations such as the EFCC who have tried to, recover some of these funds, corruption seems deeply entrenched in Nigeria's international image, and that is such a sad state to be. Like, a bad reputation spreads so fast, and the part is that we know Nigerians are some of the most talented, people we have around the world. Whether we're looking at education, look at how many Nigerians are leading so many different industrial sectors, but unfortunately, reputation matters so much more than talent. And I really don't think that we're doing enough to reclaim the reputation of the nation.
Yeah, I also think that when you look at the details of the report, it spoke to the institutions that were built to challenge impunity, which the report says that it's very weak. We look at the judiciary that is meant to be the temple of democracy.
Yes.
Just last year, we saw that the Justice Kekere Ekun, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, in a bid to sanitize and to reform the judiciary, conducted an integrity test. Out of 64, 28 failed the integrity test. Those are the institutions. And we have a situation where the Office of the Auditor General is being treated with disdain, if you ask me, because recently they released a report about missing oil fund. Since 2022, nothing has been done about this. And we have Sarah also filing a suit against NNPCL. Don't forget that last year, again, sometimes in September, Senator Wadata also raised an alarm over missing over 200 trillion naira, which he said is unaccounted for. And up till date, the NNPCL, which is supposed to be the chief cornerstone of the Nigerian economy is yet to account for all this missing funds. So it's glaring. And when you see what recently happened yesterday at the National Assembly,
Yes,
you will
that's
know that
part of it.
it's just part of this systemic
Yes.
failure and institutional and state capture that has riddled Nigeria's polity.
To your point on NNPC, didn't we have the president the other day writing off some monies for NNPC that he was unable to account for, and the state governors were like, not so fast. We would like the NNPC to account for every cover. No, yeah, that report was out sometime last week, but that also shows, because the president is the Minister of Petroleum.
Right.
And that has been the tradition for quite a while in Nigeria. And often the hammer falls on the Minister of State for Petroleum and the NNPC. But nobody questions the president and the decision he makes in that ministry. But to your point, Yolanda, on reputation, this has immediate impact on Nigeria's credibility. Yes. International partners take these things very seriously. It tells investors, lenders, and citizens that anti-corruption rhetoric isn't translating into systematic change. International partners price this into risk. You're being seen as a risky country to do business. Investors hesitate. Borrowing costs rise because of this. You're a poor country, potentially rich, you're a poor country, but your borrowing is quite expensive because of this reputation and credibility image that has to do with corruption. And so ordinary Nigerians also feel it, because through inflation and poor service delivery, it affects everyone. Politically, it undercuts government claims of reform, because you're reforming, but you're not plugging leakages, and there's still corruption in the country. So what reform are you doing? So it just signals a system of stagnation that we have in the country. So, I mean, it's not something you want to do. All of you have mentioned, both of you have mentioned the police, the courts, and how they are challenged. So it's a situation that Nigeria doesn't want to be in, but it has to work its way out of it deliberately, than just being silent. Let's take an international story. Families of Kenyans lured into the military in Russia under the guise of work abroad are urging the Kenyan government to intervene to bring their wards home. Those whose children are reported dead are asking for help to repatriate their bodies. The Kenyan government is also reportedly going to confront Russia over unacceptable use of their nationals in combat. Kenyan foreign minister was quoted as saying that the practice is unacceptable and clandestine. He revealed the country has taken action, including shutting down illegal recruiters and 600 recruitment agencies, duping people with promise of job abroad. And the government is going to talk with Russia. Also, South Africa, too, in a related story, it says President Vladimir Putin has pledged to help 17 South Africans fighting there to return home. This is happening all across Africa. People are lured to fight for Russia, not only Russia, Ukraine, too.
Yes.
So beware, there's clandestine recruitment going on. But Yolanda, poverty, unemployment at home, and ignorance has made Africans to be a target for exploitation.
Indeed, desperate Africans have been searching for greener pastures from time immemorial. And this war in Russia and Ukraine has provided some sort of solution, well, fake solution, because these illegal recruitment agencies, they've been going around recruiting Africans with the promise of training, promise of a good salary, a bright future in exchange for their allegiance to fight a war that has raged on for years, and a war that has nothing to do with them.
Sometimes they don't even know they're going for war.
Absolutely. And there's so many factors to look at this through, but let's stay focused. Kenya's foreign minister, as you said, has spoken against how exploitative this initiative has been. And there's been an outrage from families as well of young men who have been tortured and killed. I remember seeing some footages of some young men who were being brandished. They were asked to say their full name and where they're from, and there were racial slurs being thrown. There was torture involved. So many horrific things to watch. Imagine your family watching from back home and seeing all these things. For some of the families, they hadn't even known that these young men had signed up for these things. So yes, this dehumanization is just very, very sad. Yeah. And I think what stands out as well is the level of deceit that is involved. First of all, a winter in Ukraine, in Russia, is not one to joke with. Those climate conditions of those areas are very, very harsh, even for the locals themselves. Now, can you imagine somebody who has never traveled before and is now coming from a tropical climate, going to those devastatingly cold places, very poor training. Some of them are not even, they don't even have any combat, or industry knowledge of what it means to, fight in a war. And then just being
they
killed
get 3 weeks training. They get 3 weeks training.
My
yes.
goodness.
Okay.
It's terrible. Yes, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I think when it comes to international law, I think the Rome Statute, when it comes to aggression, now the burden of proof will now be to really ascertain if they were forcefully conscripted into this war. Because we all know the state of the economy of many African countries, because we also have international reports stating that about 1,400 came from 36 African countries to be conscripted into the Russian war. And we also have some also conscripted by the Ukrainian intelligence agency. They are even the ones coming up with this figure, because the Russian government is very reluctant to give a full disclosure on this crime. But we're also happy that the Kenyan government is taking a front role in the advancement of citizenship diplomacy
and
in
South Africa too,
and also South Africa. So it's a syndrome that cuts across many African countries. 36 out of 54 African countries. It tells you that it's an African problem. That and one of the common sects or the common interwoven interest is poor governance and poor state of the economy that people have found themselves in Africa. So that desperate search for a greener pasture, we saw the reports from the migrant ship that en route Libya just yesterday. We saw that height of desperation from Africans just to search for, find a greener pasture. So I think that is a death trap on its own, crossing that kind of a river.
All right, but beyond that, opportunities need to be created back home for people.
Indeed.